In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. The title of this episode is Understanding Energy Propagation from the Quran. In this episode I will show, Allah God willing, how to understand the mechanisms of energy propagation by pondering upon the last revelation of Allah God to people, the Noble Quran, such that the believer would be the teacher of others and not the one on the receiving end. And when the non-Muslim, he sees that he's learning this knowledge from the Noble Quran, he would be attracted to the book, to the Quran, and that would be a way for him to be guided to the path of Allah God Almighty. Now Allah God Almighty teaches us the key to understand all creation. Allah God Almighty in the Noble Quran teaches us how to understand all what surrounds us. The key to understand all creation. And that can be found by pondering upon verse 30 of chapter 21 of the Noble Quran, where Allah God Almighty states the following: Have not those who disbelieve known that the heavens and the earth were one weaved fabric? Then Allah God tore them apart, and Allah God has made from water every living thing. Will they not then believe? Now, this is a verse in the Noble Quran. If we ponder upon it, because brothers and sisters, the key to understand the Noble Quran is to ponder upon the verses and not just merely reciting them. So Allah states here that Allah has made from water every living thing. What does this mean? This means that Allah God Almighty created all of His creation with the same design of water. He created all of His creation, everything that we see around us, with the same design of water. For example, water is composed of matter and energy. Water is composed of matter, the thing that you feel and touch, and energy that drives objects in water. And we see creation is also composed of matter, the thing that you feel and touch, and energy. So we see how water is a model for creation. So this shows the ability of Allah God Almighty to create this diversity in creation from one source. And this proves the oneness of Allah God Almighty, that He is one and unique. Since all of His diversity from one source, thus all is diversity in creation from one creator, Allah God Almighty. Now, for example, if we look at the design of atoms comprising water, we see that they are arranged in hexagonal pattern, hexagonal cells. And if we see the arrangement of atoms in creation, for example in wood, steel, any material, we see this also in a hexagonal pattern. So we see how water is a model for creation. So from this we can understand that if we understand water, we understand creation. So the key to understand all creation is to understand water. Now, coming to energy propagation, if we need to understand how does energy propagate, we need to understand energy propagation in water. Now, if you throw a rock in a pond of water, you see that energy propagates in water with concentric circles. So energy propagates from its source in water with concentric circles. That's in two-dimensional space. Now, taking that to three-dimensional space, that will be concentric spheres. So the energy propagates in water with concentric spheres. So we can learn that in water, energy propagates in a spherical pattern. So since Allah teaches us that He created everything with the same design of water, this means that energy propagates in creation in a spherical pattern with concentric circles and concentric spheres. It's concentric spheres, but looking at it from a two-dimensional space, concentric circles. So Allah teaches us the mechanism of energy propagation in creation. So this picture shows the propagation of the basic units comprising energy field from its source in a circular pattern. Now, this is a conclusion from the Noble Quran. Now, how to prove this? How to prove this conclusion from the Noble Quran? Now, in this episode, I will prove this, Allah God willing, from many kind of aspects. For example, let's take experiments. Now, if you look at energy propagation from a light source, a light bulb, for example, you see that light propagates with in a spherical pattern, exactly as Allah teaches us from the Quran that energy propagates in concentric spheres, like water, like energy propagation in water. So from experiments we see a proof from what we learned from the Noble Quran, energy propagation from a light source. Also, if you look at mechanical energy, for example, if you tap a table, energy propagates with concentric circles and concentric spheres. And for example, earthquakes, there is a source for the earthquake, and the energy propagates with concentric circles and concentric spheres, exactly like energy propagation in water, exactly as Allah teaches us in the Noble Quran. Also, if we look at the propagation of electromagnetic energy from, for example, transmission towers of mobiles, we see that energy propagates with concentric spheres, concentric circles, like energy propagation in water. So, this is a proof from experiments to the validity of the conclusions from the Noble Quran. Now, I will prove this with another method. It's called computer simulation. And computer simulation, what you do is that you build a model in the computer and you give this model the properties of the material that you want, and you apply forces to this model, and the computer then solves the model and tells you how energy propagates or any kind of mechanism that you want to see. So what I did is that you see a rectangle, and this rectangle I gave it the properties of a certain material. Then I fixed the rectangle from its edges. So this is a material fixed from its edges, and I applied a force at the center of this material, as you see pointed to by the red arrow. I applied a force at the center of this rectangle. Like, for example, you have a table, and I fixed it at the edges, and I applied a force at the middle. Now then I solved the model, and the computer told me how this kind of energy, how this mechanical force propagates in this matter, this material. Here we see the results from the computer, and you can see on the left the propagation of mechanical displacements from a source in matter. As you see, it's concentric circles, exactly like the conclusions from the Noble Quran, that energy propagates with concentric circles like in water. So there is a perfect match between the conclusions from the Quran with the results obtained from simulations. So this is the propagation of mechanical displacements from the source, like from the source that we tap the table with. Now you see there is another kind of aspect here, is that the miracle of knowledge of the Noble Quran, that the Quran is far superior to any book, that to any kind of book. And another fact here is that when Allah explains something in the Noble Quran, it's easy to understand. Any person can understand this. That's another kind of miracle of the Noble Quran, that the way Allah explains it in the Noble Quran, it's understandable to any kind of person, different age groups, regardless of the diplomas or certificates he has. So it's another kind of miracle of the Quran. Now this is propagation of mechanical energy. Let's look at thermal energy, heat. The same kind of rectangle, but instead of applying force to the middle, I applied a heat source, like a higher temperature. As you can see, the computer gave that the heat propagates from the high source to the low source with concentric circles, exactly like water propagation, water energy propagation in water. So again, there's a perfect match between the conclusions from the Noble Quran and the simulations for thermal energy. So any kind of energy, it propagates with the same mechanism of propagation as in water. Now let's take electrical energy, for example. The same rectangle, but instead of applying force or thermal energy, I applied electrical voltage to the middle, and you see that the results from the computer, that electrical voltage propagates from the high to the low region with concentric circles, exactly like the propagation of energy in water. So this, we see that I proved the conclusion of the Noble Quran from experiments and from simulations, computer simulations. Now, another application of this knowledge from the Noble Quran is the ability to explain phenomena in creation. Now there are certain phenomena in creation that's unexplained by science, which can be explained from the Quran. For example, here we have a rectangle fixed at the bottom and a force is applied at the top. As you can see, this rectangle is fixed at the bottom and force F is applied at the top. Now, from the theory of structural mechanics, the stress, the concentration of the force, which is force over area, it's equal in all parts of the rectangle. So what they teach students is that the stress, which is equal to force over area, is equal in all parts of this rectangle. But actual experiments, they show that stress is inhomogeneous in this rectangle. It does not have the same value at each location within the rectangle. But this can't be explained by the theory of structural mechanics. It says that stress is equal, but in fact the experiment shows that it's not equal, it's inhomogeneous. Now, if we come to the understanding of the Quran, where Allah God Almighty teaches us that force propagates with concentric circles, this means that the concentration is not equal, is inhomogeneous within the material. So the understanding for the Noble Quran explains experiments in a perfect way. So when the force propagates with concentric circles, the concentration of the force would be maximum near the first circle, for example, and then will be reduced with the other circles. So the first circle, you will have the highest concentration, the highest stress, and then the circle to follow it will have lower stress and lower. And thus the stress would be maximum near to the application of the force and lower as we move away from it. And this is exactly given in simulations. As you can see on the screen, the simulation gives that the stress is inhomogeneous within the material as predicted from the Noble Quran. Now, one possible application for this in material science is that when building a structure, the maximum density of a material should be placed near to force application points, and lower density can be used as we go away from the force. This gives better utilization of material and lower weight. If we look at the human body, Allah God Almighty designed the human body in a perfect way. If we look at the hip region, we see this exact principle there, where Allah God Almighty, we see that maximum density of bone is found near to force application by the muscles, and the lower density of bones as we go away from the muscle attachment points. So this gives perfect utilization of material and lower weight and mercy during movement, so there is no fatigue, there is no high weight or large weight of bones. So we see, brothers and sisters, the engineering applications of the understanding from the Noble Quran is to use material with different densities and place this density like a spherical pattern, where you have the maximum density at the point of force application points and lower density as we go away from the force, from the region of the application of the force. So we see, brothers, the beauty of the Noble Quran, and we need to use this to bring people closer to the Book of Allah God Almighty, and to strive to make the word of the Creator supreme. And to know more details about this topic, please visit my website at www.quran-miracle.com, and you can email me at zquran@yahoo.com, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon you all.